Hi, in this video I'm going to show you what you need to know about your hand, wrist, and forearm, because unless you know why to do something, when I show you things to do, unless you know why, it's not going to make any sense. So first of all, if you have true carpal tunnel syndrome, you also have forearm problems. It's almost impossible not to. Why? Because your forearms move your wrist and fingers, and to prove that, just grab your forearm up by your elbow, and if your forearms are really big, you might have to grasp it a couple places, but feel what those muscles are doing when you move your fingers up and down, when you move your wrist up and down. The muscles on the palm side of the forearm are called flexors, and there's the ones that the different muscles move your fingers up and down, and or squeezing or moving your wrists forward. The ones in the back of your forearm are called extensors, and they're the ones that open your fingers, open your fist, move your wrist back, that type of thing. So when you're using your hands, most people use their flexor muscles much more than they use the extensor muscles. For example, if you're gripping things, whether it's a jackhammer or something more subtle, bicycles, weights, pruning shears, whatever, the flexor muscles are being used far more than the extensor muscles. And when you're moving your fingers back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, playing a musical instrument like a piano or guitar, or if you're typing, the forearm muscles move those fingers. And what happens when the forearm muscles are overused? Just like any other muscle, when it's overused, it gets tight. And it can get knots in it. What are knots? Knots are muscle fibers stuck together. And the more muscle fibers that there are stuck together, that shortens the muscle. And a shorter muscle is weaker. You can also have muscles stuck in contraction. They're not in spasm, they're just the little muscle cells are stuck. And that shortens the muscle. So what happens? It pulls your carpal tunnel forward. It also weakens the muscle. Why? Because it's not using its full potential. So when the muscles are tight and they pull the wrist forward, that leaves less room in the carpal tunnel. And what's the carpal tunnel? The carpal tunnel is a ditch made up of 8 wrist bones. Across the front there's a hard strap called the carpal tunnel ligament. And within that tunnel that's formed are your 9 flexor muscles and the median nerve. And if you have carpal tunnel or a similar carpal, if the median nerve is pinched, in other words, you'll have numbness in the thumb, first finger, second finger, and half the ring finger. If you have numbness in the little finger and this finger, it's also a problem, but it's not carpal tunnel syndrome, and I'll talk about those as well. And thumb problems, the thumb is a little different animal because there's muscles in the thumb that go across like this. There's also muscles in the pinky, and people think that this part here is just the palm, but it's also the base of the thumb. It's a very powerful little muscle, and in the last 2 videos I'll talk a lot about problems that occur in there. But there's also some muscles that move your thumb from the forearm, and that can cause thumb problems too. And the only thumb problem I'll talk about right here is what they call the quervians. And I'll talk about that after I talk about what's going on with your fingers, because if you look here above your wrist, and unless your hands are really fat, as you move your fingers up and down, you'll see these pencil-like things moving up and down, up and down, and up and down. What those are tendons, but those tendons are in what's called a sheath. And a sheath is, if you're familiar with a bicycle cable, a bicycle brake cable, where you squeeze the brake at the handlebar, and at the tire it squeezes the tire. Well, when you contract the flexor muscles in the forearm, that'll move the various muscles, move different fingers, and when it goes through the carpal tunnel, it's going through in that hollow, each tendon is going through a hollow sheath. And there's only a couple places in the body, the ankles and the hands, where the tendons do that. The tendons up here by the elbow, where you get tennis elbow or golfer's elbow, those tendons don't go through sheaths. Those tendons are right next to the bone. Tendons connect muscles to bone. So here, through the wrist, those tendons are long and skinny. So when you squeeze, or when you're gripping, it's being caused by the forearm muscles pulling on the tendons. And when you're typing or using a musical instrument, those tendons go back and forth, 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 back and forth. And inside those tendon sheaths, there's lubrication. It's called synovial fluid, but it's not like motor oil. You know that if your engine in your car runs out of motor oil and those pistons that are supposed to be freely going up and down, up and down, up and down aren't getting the oil, that engine's going to seize right up. Well, this is not motor oil in there. Our anatomy was not made for a lot of repetitive use like that. Our anatomy was made for cavemen, and our evolution body-wise has not evolved all that much from there. You know, it's not made for modern technology and stuff. So in order to avoid this back and forth drying out of your lubrication, you need to take breaks while you're working. Every 20 minutes, you should take 5 minutes from not doing this. That doesn't mean you have to stop working, but you can answer a phone, read your mail, go get a drink of water, go to the bathroom, whatever. 5 minutes every 20 minutes to avoid that from drying out. When the fluid in there starts to dry out, you get friction. What happens when there's friction? Things break off. Little pieces of tendon might slough off, little pieces of your sheath. And that builds up in there. And it's even worse when you're typing or using a musical instrument or whatever. The back of your forearm should be in a straight line with the back of your palm. But a lot of people either type like this, or they're typing like that, or instead of floating over the keyboard, they rest the palms of their hands or that part of the wrist on something and then flex their fingers. Well, what happens when you're doing all this stuff instead of having your hand in a straight line with the back of your forearm? Well, those poor tendons have to go around corners. And if they're dried out already and they're going around corners, it's like you've got a rope over a tree limb. If you go back and forth over a tree limb with a rope, part of that rope or part of the bark is going to come off. I've got a section in the second section on why anti-inflammatory drugs are bad. Because in the short run, they make you feel better. In the long run, they make your problem worse because they interfere with the natural healing process. And I explain that in the section on why not anti-inflammatory drugs. But you can mechanically work on those. Now when they do surgery, they slit that carpal tunnel ligament. No matter what type of surgery, you know, there's open carpal tunnel surgery and there's endoscopic where you don't see as much of a scar, but they're still splitting that ligament, which is that hard strap across there. And just about everybody who has carpal tunnel surgery has got a weakened grip because that strap there is to provide leverage. The only time you should consider carpal tunnel surgery if it's gotten so bad you've got no other choice. But when a doctor throws out nerve damage, the carpal tunnel surgery does not fix nerves. It's not fixing any nerves at all. It's just taking the pressure off the nerve. So if you can take the pressure off the nerve by non-invasive means, why would you want to go through that?